benefits for the people, supporting them to get agricultural purposes. It's going to take time, imply resources, but we need to put them. Other, palm oil. I listened to the example today about palm oil. What happened with palm oil, for instance? The practice in the past was to devastate and to cut down all the trees, and then to put palm oil. And that is damaging a lot forestry, provoking carbon emissions. What is happening in some places like Indonesia, by companies with Unilever? We heard today somebody, the director for Nigeria today, he was here. Unilever and other companies are promoting palm oil, but without deforestation. And in order to do that, they are getting an agreement in order to buy palm oil only from certificated plantations in the world without deforesting the place. And finally, what we did in Mexico, and I think it should do, there are a lot of indigenous communities in Mexico, and they are the owners of the woods, the owners of rainforests. And always we try to say, oh, preserve the woods, preserve the trees, preserve the forest. What about their families, no? What about their income? Well, we understood that we need to provide a dignified income for those families. So we created the program of payment of environmental services. Yes, they are providing us a service in terms of carbon sequestration. Yes, they are providing us a service in terms of drinking water, for instance. They are providing us a service with clean air. So we need to pay the rest of the society and the rest of the world, especially developed countries. We need to pay for those indigenous communities to preserve the forest in that place.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mrs. Adebayo, Honorable Minister for Agriculture, I guess that's an alternative view. You spoke about deficit spending, and I get the impression from you that it's a great thing, but it's got to be short-term. And you also talked about getting rid of subsidies, increasing taxes, and the face of the Minister of Finance lead. I want you to rest a bit for 1 second. I'd like to ask the Honorable Minister for Finance, please, can someone give her the microphone? I'd like to hear your view on his view about how much we should borrow and for how long, bearing in mind our own debt profile, his view on subsidies, and the question of whether we should remove subsidies on petrol and put subsidies on power, and whether we should remove subsidies on forex and allow lower interest rates. In other words, should petroleum prices go up, put subsidy on power because that will allow for more industrialization, let foreign exchange go up, and let interest rates come down, in the context of what he says about borrowing. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
I think this is what.
Oh, so it's okay.
Thank you.
Don't increase my tax rate, by the way.
Okay, that was about 4 questions in one, but I'll try and sequence them in order. The first question you asked was about debt and debt levels. And the first thing to speak about Nigeria's debt level is that we're at 21% of GDP. Okay, so that's very low. The recommended for a developing economy is around 40%. So we've kept our debt strategy very conservative. We've borrowed specifically to fund infrastructure. So that has to be very well understood, that this is not borrowing to pay salaries, it's not borrowing to fund just recurrent expenditure. We've been very specific that we need to deliberately increase our borrowings, and it was interesting looking at the slides that when they were faced with recession, they did exactly what we did. Borrow and stimulate the economy, and that's what took us out of recession in 5 quarters. So that's the first thing to say. And if you look at the ERGP, the plan is systematically we then begin to reduce the level of borrowing. So the level of borrowing anticipated in 2018 budget, which is in draft, is lower than 17, and the difference will be made up by increased taxes, which is where you come in. So
you know I'm a priest, so it doesn't matter.
Even offerings are taxable. So
The VP will not allow that. There, the VP would come in.
So that's the answer to that. So the debt strategy is very well managed. It's very conservative. We don't anticipate going significantly above where we are, because as the economy grows and as we improve our tax collection rate, which is the real problem, our tax to GDP is 6%. Mexico, I think, is at about 27, 28. We're at 6%. So if we get more people to pay their taxes, we borrow less, and we can still sustain the level of infrastructure spending that is required to get growth going. The second question you asked was about...
He spoke about subsidies, and so the question has been petrol subsidy, subsidy on power, subsidy on forex, and interest rates.
Okay. So the first thing about subsidies is a theoretical issue, because there's a narrative that is very much, I wouldn't say sold to, but bought by developing countries, that all subsidies are bad. And that's not correct. Okay, because every country chooses what to subsidize. So every cow in the field in America is subsidized. Milk is subsidized in the UK. So governments decide what to subsidize, when to subsidize it, and it's about the efficiency of the delivery of that subsidy that's important. As regards petroleum subsidies, what we're looking at from a macro perspective is the impact. If we remove petroleum subsidy at the moment, there will be an impact on prices and on inflation, because we are so dependent on fuel at the moment, because we don't have the infrastructure in place. It will have an impact on prices. So every decision that's made has to be well calibrated, well thought out, in the interests of the Nigerian people. So the economic management team will continue to study the circumstances and will make decisions as and when the capacity of the people to absorb the impact of that decision has been well managed, and we believe that growth needs to be restored first. And I said in my presentation, it's about sequencing. There are a number of reforms that need to be made. It's about when they are made, and that decision will be well thought out and implemented at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I just have one or two more questions. It won't be one that will make me pay taxes on offerings in church. And that's in relation to infrastructure. You spoke about infrastructure. And I think attesting to your Guinness World Record is the fact that New York, in building the Tapanzi Bridge, which is the largest infrastructure project they have in the States now, has to bring in cranes from Mexico. So it's true what the president said about their intervention in infrastructure. So the question is, what is it that you did which we can learn from that would ensure that the infrastructure spend and structure continues into the future? Because as I said, you left office in 2012, but the Mexican engineering was borrowed to build a bridge in the United States. So what is it that we can do? The governor of Ogun State says he wants to be the first past post. He wants gold. I think he has. You don't have bronze now, do you? You say you're fourth. You say you're fourth, governor. Yeah, no, governor, here you said you want to be third, governor, when you stood here. I'm not talking internet generated revenue, governor. Abi, we know you're first with the first lady who is always on point, as is said. So what is it that can be done? Because the governor of Ogun State, as you can see, has done a lot. Not because he's here, but because in fact there's a lot of infrastructural change in this state. They've built 15 flyovers. There was none in the state before. And probably he's done more. I think I have to talk to your commissioner for information. They should do what they do in Lagos. Because people get the impression that infrastructure is in Lagos. They should come to Ogun State and see what is happening. So, but the question is, up Ogun, the question, sir, very quickly is, what is it that can be done to sustain what you have done and what he has done into the future?
Well, it's a difficult
question because, well,